All right, so you've really outdone yourself with these JD Vance sources. What a story, huh?
Yeah, this one's a doozy.
We're talking Hillbilly Elegy Vance to potential Trump running mate Vance.
Right. It's quite the journey.
It really is. And you've given us so much to dig into. We've got interviews, we've got articles. It's like we're piecing together a puzzle.
And the pieces keep changing shape.
Exactly. Right. So where do we even begin with this guy? What do you think is the most fascinating angle here?
Well, I think what's really interesting is that, in a way, we're not just tracing one politician's journey.
It's bigger than that.
Yeah, it's like we're getting a glimpse into what's happening in American politics as a whole, you know? This idea of the two J.D. Vances, the fiery speaker on the campaign trail versus this composed, almost subdued debater.
It's like two different people.
Exactly. And that duality, that tension, it's everywhere these days.
It's true. You've got people on one side saying, he's just saying what needs to be said. And then others are like, is this guy for real?
And to be fair to Vance, I mean, he practically predicted this wouldn't be easy. Remember that quote? Something like, isn't that just how most people are?
As in, we all have different sides to us.
Exactly. Like, he's acknowledging that we're all complex. We adapt to different situations, put different faces forward.
He's not letting the media off the hook either. He suggests that by zeroing in on the most explosive sound bites, they're missing the nuance of his arguments.
Which makes you wonder, is this calculated? Or is he genuinely misunderstood?
That is the million-dollar question. Is it strategy or just JD being JD? But I think before we get too lost in the weeds on that, we have to address the elephant in the room, or maybe the Magier elephant in the room.
The Trump U-turn.
The complete and utter U-turn on Donald Trump. I mean, this is a guy who once compared Trump to Hitler.
Yeah.
And now he's his potential running mate.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you even begin to reconcile those two positions?
Right. Well, you have to go back to Vance's own explanation. He talks about feeling deeply disillusioned, right, by the political elite. Like, they're completely out of touch with everyday people. And he saw Trump as a disruptor, someone who wouldn't play by their rules. He might actually shake things up. There's that quote where Vance says, if Trump didn't talk like this, he wouldn't be able to get anything done.
So almost like a necessary evil?
That's the implication, yeah.
Like a bull in a china shop? Maybe.
Maybe.
But it still begs the question, right? Is it a true change of heart or savvy political maneuvering?
It's a classic dilemma, sincerity versus strategy. And it's one that plays out over and over again in politics.
But what makes Vance's story even more interesting is how his personal relationships seem to offer a window into this evolution. Take, for instance, his fractured friendship with Sophia Nelson.
Right, yeah.
This one got to me.
It's a tough one.
Because, I mean, yeah, they were disagreeing about Sophia's transition, but you could tell from their early correspondence that there was a real sense of care and respect there. It wasn't just political posturing.
Exactly. And that makes their eventual falling out over gender-affirming care for minors even more poignant in a way.
Yeah.
Because Vance's current stance, you know, using terms like chemical experimentation on minors, it's a far cry from the respectfulness of those early exchanges.
It's like he drew a line in the sand and wasn't willing to budge, even for a friend.
Right.
Which, you know, it really makes you wonder, how much do our personal relationships shape our political views?
Right.
And when do those differences become so profound that it makes maintaining those personal connections impossible?
It's a question without any easy answers, that's for sure.
No, definitely not. But it highlights how deeply personal these debates can become.
Yeah.
And speaking of personal, we have to talk about Vance's childless cat lady's comments.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Talk about a comment section explosion.
I think we all remember that one.
He certainly knows how to get attention, that's for sure.
He does. And while Vance has called those comments sarcastic and taken out of context, he still stands by the underlying sentiment.
Right.
He's concerned about what he sees as a societal shift away from family and children. Like, he's pointing to anxieties about climate change impacting family decisions, even just the way people react to kids in public spaces as evidence of this. Remember that anecdote he told about being on a train?
I do, yeah.
He was talking about this young mother patiently handling, you know, her kids who were, I don't know, being kids.
Energetic.
Exactly. And it was like everyone else on the train was just annoyed by their very presence.
Right.
It's interesting, you know, whether you agree with Vance or not, he's tapping into a very real fear that I think some people have, particularly in Western societies, about declining birth rates.
Yeah, definitely.
It's almost like he's saying, you know, hey, are we accidentally designing a future where kids are an afterthought?
Interesting way to put it.
Whether that's the right way to frame it, well, that's a whole other debate.
It is. It is. It's a complex issue. And Vance's rhetoric definitely isn't going to win over everyone on that.
That's for sure.
And speaking of complex issues and maybe some divisive rhetoric, can we talk about abortion?
Oh, boy.
Talk about a
Right.
political minefield.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you've got Trump changing his stance more often than I change my socks, and then you've got Vance's own evolution to try to unpack.
Right.
I mean, because remember, during his Senate campaign, Vance was all on board with those federal restrictions on abortion. Very few exceptions.
Right. But now he seems to be singing a slightly different tune.
A little bit.
He's saying that Republicans, they need to rebuild trust with the American people on this issue, And he keeps pointing to that Ohio referendum where voters overwhelmingly rejected those stricter limits.
Mm.
So it's like he's acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, a more nuanced approach is needed.
Which, I mean, he did say in a previous interview that he'd like abortion to be legal nationally,
Right.
which feels like a complete 180 from where he was before.
It does. It really highlights that tightrope that politicians often find themselves walking, right?
Yeah.
Trying to balance their own personal views with this constantly shifting public opinion.
Especially on something as, let's face it, emotionally charged as abortion.
Yeah, absolutely.
You almost have to wonder, is he trying to have it both ways?
It's possible.
Appeal to different voters with carefully chosen words. Or maybe this is a genuine shift in thinking.
Maybe.
Like a realization that maybe that old playbook doesn't work anymore.
It's hard to say for sure, but it wouldn't be the first time a politician has adjusted their stance to kind of match the political climate, right?
For sure, for sure.
And speaking of changing tunes, we can't forget about Vance's evolving position on immigration.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Remember that article he wrote back in 2012 criticizing the GOP's hardline approach?
But seriously, I completely missed that one.
Yeah, it's out there.
What was he even arguing back then?
He was questioning the logistics and the morality of mass deportation.
Oh.
Fast forward to today, and Vance is singing a very different tune.
Yeah, now he's all about it.
Now he's talking about deporting 1 million people a year, building border walls, even taxing remittances sent back to families overseas.
Wow. So he's basically gone from questioning mass deportations to practically calling for them.
Pretty much.
I mean, what happened in those intervening years?
Well, he cites the estimated 25 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S.
Which is a lot of people.
It is, although it is worth noting that the Department of Homeland Security places that number closer to 11 million.
Okay, so maybe not quite as many, but still a lot of people.
Right, but regardless of the specific figure, he's proposing a massive, massive undertaking.
Yeah.
And it really begs the question, is it even feasible to deport that many people? Not to mention the economic and ethical implications of such a move.
Talk about a tangled web.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. And then there's that whole issue of hypocrisy, too, right? Like relying on a largely immigrant labor force while simultaneously advocating for their removal.
It's a tension that Vance doesn't seem to fully address, Like he focuses heavily on the perceived negative impacts of immigration, but rarely acknowledges the contributions that immigrants make.
Yeah, it's very one-sided.
It feels like a very selective lens, to say the least.
To say the least. And, this kind of brings us to another, let's say, uncomfortable chapter in Vance's story. The controversy surrounding Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio.
Right, the incident where he played a role in spreading that rumor about Haitian immigrants eating pets.
Which, I mean, come on.
Yeah, it was a whole thing.
And it wasn't just some harmless gossip.
Oh, no, it had real consequences.
That rumor, amplified by Vance's platform, had real-world consequences.
Absolutely. You had bomb threats against businesses, kids too scared to go to school. Like, the entire community was thrown into turmoil.
It's scary how quickly something like that can spiral.
It really highlights the dangers of misinformation, especially when it targets already vulnerable populations.
And it makes you question Vance's judgment. Right?
It does.
Like, even if he genuinely believed those rumors, shouldn't someone in his position be more careful about the information they spread?
Well, in his defense, Vance claims he was simply prioritizing the concerns of American citizens over undocumented immigrants.
But even if you accept that argument, it still doesn't excuse spreading blatant falsehoods.
No.
Especially when it leads to such harmful consequences, like it sets a dangerous precedent.
It does. It really does. It raises questions about accountability.
Exactly.
Like when someone in a position of power uses that platform to spread misinformation, what are the consequences?
It's a question that feels especially relevant when we consider Vance's stance on the 2020 election.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're hitting on something really crucial there. The 2020 election, it still looms large. And Vance's stance on it, well, it's been anything but clear-cut.
It's like nailing Jell-O to a wall.
Exactly.
You ask him directly, did Trump lose? And he's known to kind of dance around the question.
It's a classic deflection tactic. And it plays into this larger trend we're seeing in American politics, where casting doubt on election integrity has become this way to kind of undermine opponents and delegitimize results you don't like.
Which is terrifying when you think about it.
It's a dangerous game no matter which side you're on.
Exactly.
Because if you erode trust in the very foundation of democracy itself, what are you left with?
Right. It's like a house of cards at that point.
Now, to be fair to Vance, he has said he's committed to a peaceful transfer of power.
The key phrase there being after every legal ballot is counted. Which, and maybe I'm just cynical here,
Yeah.
feels like it leaves the door open for, more baseless challenges.
Right.
More attempts to sow doubt about the process.
It's a pattern we've seen before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cast out, amplify distrust, and then try to reshape the system in a way that benefits you.
Which is why I think Vance is such a fascinating and frustrating figure, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, he's clearly intelligent, right?
Yeah.
He's capable of nuanced thought.
Mhm.
But there's this undercurrent of, I don't know, opportunism.
Yeah.
Like, he's trying to have it both ways.
It's almost like he's holding up this funhouse mirror to American politics. Like, depending on how you tilt it, you get a completely different reflection.
So where does that leave us?
Right. With this puzzle we're trying to solve.
Yeah. What's the takeaway here?
I think the takeaway is that we're looking at a reflection of ourselves, honestly.
Ooh, I like that. Explain that.
Our anxieties, our divisions. JD Vance, he's a microcosm of the larger forces at play in our society right now. He might be playing on our fears, our frustrations, but those feelings, they're real.
And understanding why those feelings exist, that's just as important as dissecting Vance's, ever-evolving positions.
Absolutely. This isn't just about one politician's journey. It's about the direction we're heading collectively. And that, I think, is what's most important for people to consider as they continue to follow this story. It's less about, predicting where JD Vance lands and more about understanding what his rise, the reactions to it, say about us.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
I have a feeling this is a conversation we're going to be having again soon. But until then, thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And remember, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking those tough questions.